And I'm going to just go through some funny examples of things being lost in translation. So kind of when English or when ideas go global, sometimes the slogan might not be translated the way it should be. And here's the guy named Frank Perdue. Perdue Chicken, a famous chicken brand. They're more popular in the East Coast, especially New York. It's not who Purdue's named after, spelled different. But he came up with this famous line, his famous motto for his chicken: "It takes a strong man to make a tender chicken." When that was translated into Spanish, when he started to go global, you can see how that was definitely lost in translation. So I'm not an expert on the Spanish language, but you can probably predict the words that weren't translated properly in that example. Here's another one, ballpoint pen manufacturing company. I know no one really uses ballpoint pens anymore, but in the 80s everyone did. So they had this slogan: "It won't leak in your pocket and embarrass you." And once again, let's go to Mexico and put this logo all over a bus. And obviously that didn't work out either. And so I believe embarazada, I'm not, once again, a Spanish expert at all, but I believe that might translate into as pregnant. So that's what happened there. Further, KFC, finger licking good. So once again, we talked about KFC. It's got all those stores in China. 10,000 of them to be exact. Well, here's the translation there in China. Obviously, not funny if your fingers are no longer there. Here's a map that shows the percentage of the population who speak a language other than English at home. So in other words, the states in which there's more than English being spoken in large amounts. And that's, of course, going to be our border states to our southern border. And so that makes a lot of sense. The American Southwest, heavily Latina / Latino, large Hispanic population, so that makes sense for sure. Other places you're going to see is large metropolitan areas, places that have big cities. Big cities attract international migrants, and so Chicago, LA, New York City, much of the New England, Mid-Atlantic area. So that helps to explain why we see these different patterns. But for the most part, the American South and the Midwest, Great Plains, we see very little variation in terms of the languages being spoken, because English is the dominant language. Of course, there along the southern border with Mexico, we're going to have this blending occur. And this blending is something we call syncretism. So you take two things that are unique or different, combine them, you create something new. So you essentially take the Spanish language, combine with it the English language, you get something new called Spanglish. So some examples of Spanglish, we find in this top quote: "Presta mi su credit card." That essentially is translated, "Lend me your credit card." Credit card, not a Spanish term or phrase, definitely an English phrase. And the next one, it says "buy and sell cars." So C-A-R-R-O-S is not in the Spanish language. It essentially is cars. It borrows cars from the English language. Finally, the last one essentially is asking, where do you work? With the idea that you punch in a punch clock, punch your card at the time clock, something that you used to do when you have to come into work. You punch in, you punch out. So that's essentially asking, where do you punch, or where do you punch in, or essentially, where do you work? So all this is examples of Spanglish in which you fuse together two different languages to create something new so you can communicate. Up in Canada, there's one particular province, which is just like how we have states in the United States, one particular province in which it's completely French-speaking, and that's Quebec. So Quebec is a part of Canada in which people speak their own or separate language from the rest of the country. So this kind of lends, of course, to this natural fusion of what they call franglais, where you combine French with English, franglais. So essentially what this is this fusion, the syncretism. But the French, they're a little bit, they're not too cool with this. The French definitely want to protect their particular language. They absolutely hate it when people use franglais. So they're ones that really are all about protecting their language, even if they're the ones in French Canada. They all are really hardcore about protecting their French identity. Here's some specific examples of franglais, which is essentially the incorporation of English into the French language, and that's definitely how the French would view it too. So this is some examples. First off, je suis tired. Tired is not a French term; it's an English term. Next up is longtemps pas voir. What that means is essentially long time no see. Finally, je ne care pas. So care is not part of the French language. It's inserted into there to say I don't care, and yeah, I don't care either. One of my buddies went over to South Africa, took this picture in which they allowed me to use of some examples of how South Africans have kind of, you see this fusion, this syncretism, where they blend in some English with the native languages.